"Don't cry, Mommy. Maybe that man will help us." The little girl pointed to a millionaire stranger. The sky was the color of bruised steel, and the rain did not fall. It pounded. Thick, unrelenting sheets of it slashed against the glass of the empty bus shelter, turning the sidewalk into a dark, trembling river. Angela Carter, 26, sat on the cold metal bench, her arms curled tightly around the fragile body of her daughter. Her once bright blonde hair was tied loosely at the nape of her neck, now damp and clinging to her face. Her skin was pale, her cheeks flushed unnaturally from fever. She was swaying slightly, teeth clenched, trying not to show how hard it was to keep herself upright. Lisa, just 3 years old, sat beside her, leaning against her mother. The little girl wore a thin beige dress, frayed at the hem, the fabric dull from wear. One sleeve was torn. She hugged a small, one-eyed stuffed bear to her chest, its seams barely holding together. She had not eaten since the morning, but she had stopped complaining. That scared Angela more than anything. The bus shelter was empty except for them. No buses came anymore at this hour, not on this route, but it was the only dry place Angela could find after the landlord had thrown them out that afternoon. She had worked a double shift, then come home to find their belongings in black bags at the curb. Her body ached from exhaustion. The fever had been creeping for days, her chest burned, her joints throbbed, but she could not afford a doctor. She could not even afford a sandwich. "Mommy?" Lisa's small voice broke the silence. "Can I have water?" Angela fumbled through her bag, pulled out a crumpled bottle, and handed it over with shaking hands. Lisa drank quietly, then leaned into her mother again. Her fingers were cold. The wind cut through the bus shelter like knives. And the rain, somehow, only grew louder. Angela's vision blurred. The bench beneath her seemed to tilt. Her hands slipped from Lisa's shoulders, and in one terrifying instant, her body slumped sideways. "Mommy?" Lisa whispered. Angela did not move. "Mommy!" the little girl cried out, louder this time. She dropped the bear and tugged at her mother's coat. "Wake up!" No answer. Lisa's hands trembled. She looked left, right. The street was almost deserted, cars moving in the far distance. Rain hit the sidewalk in waves. And then, headlights. A sleek, black Bentley pulled up at the corner, slowing near the bus shelter. The door opened. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit stepped out, holding an umbrella in one hand. His shoes clicked against the wet pavement. He was trying to avoid the worst of the downpour, clearly not expecting to find anyone else here. He glanced toward the shelter and froze. There was a woman slumped on the bench, soaked, unconscious, and beside her, a small girl with tangled blonde curls, her dress damp and dirty, standing in the rain. Lisa stared at him. Then, slowly, she walked up to him, clutching her bear with one hand. She reached for his coat, tugged gently at the cuff of his sleeve. Her eyes were round and full of tears, but she did not cry. Her voice was barely a whisper, as though she was speaking not just to him, but to hope itself. "Don't cry, Mommy," she said, turning back toward the bench. "Maybe that man will help us." The rain didn't stop, the wind didn't pause, but something in the world held its breath, and so did he. Alan Hawthorne had faced boardrooms full of skeptics. He had spoken to investors worth billions, negotiated takeovers, terminated entire departments with the stroke of a pen. But at this moment, standing in the rain outside a silent bus shelter, he was paralyzed by the eyes of a child. She had touched his sleeve like he was someone safe, someone she believed in. "Maybe that man will help us." Alan blinked the rain from his lashes. His gaze moved from the girl to the woman slumped over on the bench. She was barely conscious, her face flushed with fever, lips pale. Rain streamed from her hair like melted gold, soaking through her clothes. Without thinking, Alan dropped his umbrella and shrugged off his tailored coat. He knelt on the wet ground and gently draped it over the woman's shoulders. He looked at the little girl. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She clutched a threadbare teddy bear and answered softly, "Lisa." "Is that your mommy?" he asked. Lisa nodded. "Okay," he said gently. I'm going to get help. Everything's going to be okay." He pulled out his phone and called emergency services, his voice calm and clipped, but his heart thudding harder than it had in years. When the ambulance dispatcher confirmed a unit was nearby, he bent down and scooped the girl into his arms. Lisa flinched at first, then relaxed into his warmth. Her dress was soaked through, her skin cold. Alan glanced at her bare arms, covered in goosebumps. He looked around. No blanket, nothing to wrap her in. Without hesitating, he reached into his shirt, tugged the soft cotton undershirt from beneath his button-down, and tore it down the middle. He wrapped Lisa snugly, securing the makeshift cloth around her like a cocoon. "I'm cold," she whispered, "and Mommy didn't eat again today." Alan paused. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Lisa buried her face into the crook of his neck. "She gave me everything, even the crackers. She said she wasn't hungry, but I think she was lying. She always lies when she's really, really hungry." Alan's throat tightened. His driver opened the Bentley's rear door, and Alan slid inside with Lisa still in his arms. Rain drummed against the car roof, relentless. Moments later, the ambulance arrived. Paramedics rushed to Angela's side. Alan stepped out, staying close, arms protectively around Lisa. Angela was conscious now, barely. She murmured something he could not hear as they lifted her onto a stretcher. Her eyes fluttered open briefly. Their eyes met. She didn't speak. He didn't recognize her. Not yet. At the hospital, Lisa clung to his side in the waiting room, watching the swinging ER doors. Alan sat beside her, handing her a juice box from the vending machine. "Will Mommy be okay?" she asked, voice tiny. "She's in good hands," Alan said. "They'll take care of her." A nurse in scrubs approached, clipboard in hand. "You're with the woman from the bus stop?" she asked Alan. "I brought her in," he replied. "She's stable. Fever and exhaustion mostly. Some dehydration. It's lucky you found her." She glanced at the chart again. "Angela Carter. Wait, Carter? That name sounds familiar." The nurse tilted her head. "Did you say your name is Mr. Hawthorne?" "Yes," he answered, slowly, cautious. "She used to work at your company, Hawthorne Technologies, logistics department. She was let go a few months ago. Downsizing, I think?" Alan froze. Carter. The name scratched at the back of his mind like a forgotten file in a drawer he did not want to open. He looked down at Lisa. She was playing with the frayed ear of her teddy bear, unaware that her mother's misfortune had once been his signature on a termination list. Alan turned toward the doors of the ER, and suddenly, for the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Shame, and something deeper. A pull. A second chance, unexpected, undeserved, waiting on the other side of that door. The name would not leave him. Angela Carter. Alan sat alone in a hospital corridor, the soft buzz of fluorescent lights above and the scent of antiseptic in the air, grounding him in a reality he could not shake off. He had signed hundreds of names during that restructuring wave. Faces never attached to them, just statistics in columns, numbers to be reduced. But now, one of those names had a face, a voice, a child. Angela Carter had once worked in the logistics department, warehouse side, if he remembered correctly. Temporary contract, low risk, easily replaceable. He remembered the memo. He remembered his initials in the corner of the spreadsheet. God. He stood and walked slowly toward the patient room the nurse had pointed out, room 214. He hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. Angela was awake, propped up on the hospital bed, her skin still pale, hair damp and tangled from the rain, but her eyes were open and alert, a little too alert. She was clutching the blanket, her whole body tense. When she saw him, her expression shifted, from confusion to recognition to something harder to define. Alan stepped in. "How are you feeling?" She looked away. "Fine enough to leave." "You need rest," he said gently. "I do not have insurance," she replied, pushing herself upright, her legs trembling as she tried to stand. "I cannot afford rest." "Wait, please," Alan said, instinctively moving forward. "You passed out in the rain. You were burning up. Let them help." Angela exhaled shakily. "Help costs money." Lisa, curled up on the chair nearby, stirred and ran to her mother's side. She held her hand, as if by touch she could keep her from falling again. "Mommy," Lisa whispered, "you are not better yet." Angela crouched slightly, her strength waning. She touched Lisa's cheek. "I know, baby. But we cannot stay. Mommy already failed you once." Alan stepped closer. "You did not fail her." Angela looked up, her voice trembling. "I lost my job. I lost our apartment. I cannot feed her." "What would you call that, Mr. Hawthorne?" Alan flinched at the name, the way she said it, not with awe, but with weight. She knew exactly who he was. "I remember now," he admitted quietly. "You worked for Hawthorne Technologies." "Not for long," she said with a faint, bitter smile. "You signed the papers. I was just a name on a page, right?" I did not know." Angela's shoulders sagged. Most people don't. There was silence. Only the soft beep of the heart monitor and the sound of Lisa's small breaths filled the room. Alan cleared his throat. "You can come stay at my house, just for a few days, until you are well again." Angela straightened. "That is not necessary." "It is not charity," he said quickly. "You would be safe, warm, and Lisa would have food. That is all." Angela opened her mouth to refuse, but Lisa tugged on her sleeve, whispering, "Mommy, maybe this time we can trust him." Angela froze. Alan stood still, barely breathing. Lisa looked up at her mother, eyes wide and pleading. She was not asking for toys, or a house, or promises. She was asking for hope. Angela looked from her daughter to the man who had once unknowingly helped ruin her life. She swallowed. "One night," she said softly. "Just one." Alan nodded. "One night," he repeated. But deep inside, something told him that night would change everything. The iron gates creaked open as the black Bentley rolled down a long cobblestone driveway flanked by hedges, trimmed too perfectly, like they had not been touched by real hands in years. Angela leaned her head against the window, pale and quiet, clutching Lisa, who had finally fallen asleep in her lap. The little girl's fingers were still wrapped around the frayed ear of her stuffed bear. Alan did not say much. His grip on the steering wheel was tight, knuckles pale. He had brought people to this house before, colleagues, clients, executives, but never like this. Never someone who truly needed shelter. The mansion loomed ahead, tall and cold, its many windows unlit, like eyes that had stopped watching. He opened the door himself, letting the weight of the wooden entrance creak open to reveal the grand marble foyer. Crystal chandeliers hung above. Echoes followed each footstep. Angela stepped in hesitantly. Lisa cradled in her arms, her small feet bare against the glossy floor. Lisa peeked up. "It is so quiet." Alan nodded. "Too quiet, I think." She looked at a framed painting, soft colors, an abstract swirl of warmth and storm, and reached out a tiny hand, but stopped inches before touching it. Angela noticed and whispered, "It is okay, sweetheart. You can look." Alan walked ahead. "You both must be starving." In the kitchen, modern appliances gleamed, untouched. Alan rolled up the sleeves of his shirt, awkwardly opening cabinets, searching for something that resembled soup ingredients. Angela watched from a distance, arms folded across her chest, wary but curious. He found a can of chicken broth and noodles, then stood there staring at it like it was written in another language. After 15 fumbling minutes and an accidental spill of boiling water on the counter, Alan set 2 bowls down on the long oak table. He burned his wrist on the pot lid, letting out a soft hiss. Angela rushed forward instinctively. "Let me see." "It is nothing," he muttered, trying to hide it. She gently took his hand. Her fingers were warm, careful, experienced. She pulled a small first aid kit from the cabinet and dabbed ointment on the red skin. "No one's ever done this for me," he said quietly. Angela paused, eyes lifting to meet his. "No one's ever done this for me either," she replied. Their eyes lingered. Neither of them smiled. It was not the kind of moment that needed smiling. Just silence. And something unspoken starting to breathe between them. Later, as Lisa sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, coloring with a half-broken red crayon she had found in her mother's purse, she looked up and said, "Mommy, I am going to draw us." Angela smiled faintly. "Okay, love." Lisa's drawing was clumsy but sweet. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a sun with too many rays. She added a little bear beside the smallest figure, then stood on her toes and taped it to the stainless steel refrigerator door with a sticker. Angela chuckled softly. "Where did you get that?" "My backpack," Lisa beamed proudly. Alan walked over, looking at the drawing. The figures were labeled, "Me, Mommy, Mr. Allen." Underneath it, written in uneven letters, "Maybe our new home." He felt something catch in his throat. The kitchen, once spotless and soulless, suddenly had color. A piece of paper, a child's hope. It changed everything. He glanced at Angela. She did not speak, but in her eyes, there was a quiet softness now. Not trust, not yet, but something closer than before. And in that moment, in that vast house with too many empty rooms, one kitchen light flickered on, and it felt like a beginning. The next morning, the house was quieter than usual, but not cold, not anymore. Alan sat at the edge of the hallway, watching from a distance as Angela gently braided Lisa's hair on the living room couch. Her fingers were nimble, practiced. Lisa's small voice filled the air with stories about teddy bears, butterflies, and dreams of owning pink shoes with lights. Angela was still pale but no longer trembling. The fever had passed, thanks to the private doctor Alan had arranged without her knowing. Later that day, he drove them to the hospital for a follow-up. He waited outside the examination room, seated on a plastic chair, tapping his fingers against his knee. He could have sent someone else, his assistant, a nurse, but he stayed, quietly, willingly. When Angela stepped out, she looked surprised to see him still there. "They said I'll be fine," she said. "Just need rest." Alan stood. "Good." They walked to the car in silence, the kind that lingered but did not press. The next afternoon, Angela found an envelope tucked into the drawer of the nightstand in the guest room. Inside was a bill marked "Paid in full." It was the hospital bill. Everything. Even her old balance from before Lisa was born. She came downstairs, holding the paper tightly in her hand. "You shouldn't have done this," she said, voice tight. "I can't repay you." Alan didn't look up from the chair near the fireplace. "I didn't do it to be repaid. I don't want to owe you." "You don't," he said. "This isn't a debt, Angela. It's a chance for me to do something right." She stared at him for a long moment, trying to read the man behind the words. And for the first time, she didn't feel like he was trying to rescue her. He was trying to redeem himself. That evening, Lisa found Alan in the garden, sitting cross-legged on the edge of the stone path, watching as the sun slipped behind the trees. She plopped beside him, her bear in her lap, and offered him a daisy she had picked. "It's a little broken," she said, holding up the bent flower, "but still pretty." Alan took it, smiling gently. "Thank you." She squinted up at him. "You're really nice, you know," he chuckled. "Am I?" She nodded solemnly. "But you don't smile enough. Not real smiles. Mommy says people who don't smile are usually carrying too much inside." Alan looked at her, startled. "Did she say that?" Lisa shrugged. "Maybe I said it." He stared out at the sky, daisy in hand. "Maybe you're right." There was a long pause, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. Then, softly, Lisa leaned her head against his arm. "You don't have to do everything, Mr. Allen," she said. "You just have to stay." Alan froze. Something in him cracked open. He didn't respond. But he didn't move either. Later that night, Alan sat in his study, the desk light casting a warm glow on the old oak. He stared at a framed photo of his late fiancée tucked in the drawer, still there after all this time. but his eyes kept drifting to the messy crayon drawing Lisa had made, still pinned to the refrigerator. He reached for a notebook. On the first blank page, he wrote something at the top in clean, bold strokes. House rules. And under it, the first line, no more dinners alone. He looked at the words, let out a slow breath, and closed the notebook. Downstairs, laughter echoed faintly, Angela reading a book aloud, Lisa chiming in with the voices of the characters. And for the first time in years, the silence in the house didn't feel like grief. It felt like healing. The house had begun to change. It started quietly, an extra plate at dinner, wildflowers in a chipped vase, soft laughter drifting down hallways. Angela and Lisa had only been there for weeks, but their presence softened everything. Even the silence no longer echoed. Angela moved through the house with quiet purpose. She never treated it like a stranger's home. She treated it like a place worth saving. Every morning, she tied her hair back and headed to the old greenhouse behind the mansion, a space Alan hadn't touched since his fiancée died. The air was stale, the glass cracked, but under Angela's care, it began to breathe again. From his office, Alan often watched her, coffee in hand, heart unexpectedly still. She was not just cleaning glass. She was repairing something in him he hadn't known was broken. One afternoon, he walked outside to check on her. Angela was on a ladder, adjusting the curtains. "You should let me get that," Alan called. Angela glanced over her shoulder. "I'm fine. You'd just break something." He laughed. "Probably." A second later, the ladder shifted. Angela. A crash. A sharp cry. She fell hard onto the stone floor, her arm twisted beneath her. Alan was at her side in a blink. "Don't move." "It's okay," she winced. "Just my wrist." He lifted her gently, her fingers clutching his shirt. Inside, he laid her on the couch, grabbed the first aid kit, and knelt before her. As he rolled up her sleeve to bandage the wound, his hands froze. A long, pale scar ran along the inside of her other wrist. Angela saw his reaction and immediately pulled her arm back. Her eyes dropped. "Don't," she whispered. Alan didn't speak. He waited. After a moment, she whispered, 2 years ago, after Lisa was born. No job, no family. I thought, maybe she'd be better off without me." Her voice broke. But then she cried. "From the other room. And I couldn't leave. I couldn't leave her alone in the dark." Alan's chest tightened. He had known grief, losing someone he loved, mourning what could have been. But this, Angela's pain, was survival, pain that didn't ask permission to stay. From the doorway, a small voice trembled. "Mommy?" Lisa, clutching her worn teddy bear, stood frozen. When she saw the bandage, her face crumpled. She ran to her mother. "Don't get hurt, Mommy," she sobbed. "Please don't disappear." Angela gathered her into her arms. "I'm right here, baby. I'm not going anywhere." Alan turned away, stepping onto the balcony, hands shaking on the cold railing. His throat burned. For the first time he realized he hadn't been the only one broken. That night the house went still again. Angela went to bed early. Lisa curled into her side. Alan sat alone in his study. The lamp lit a photo of his late fiancée, her smile frozen in a time that no longer belonged to him. He stared, but the ache was different now, distant. He thought of Angela, her scar, her steady hands, the way she quietly rebuilt not just the greenhouse, but him. Maybe pain doesn't vanish. Maybe it just changes shape. The next morning, Angela came down carrying a small suitcase. "I think it's time we go," she said. "I don't want to cause more trouble." Alan looked up. He wanted to stop her, beg her to stay. But the look in her eyes, exhausted, guarded, held him back. So he nodded. Lisa followed behind her mother, holding something folded in her hands. Just before leaving, she tiptoed into Alan's office and placed it on his desk. After the door shut, he sat down, unfolded the paper, and stopped breathing. It was a drawing, 3 stick figures under a sky full of stars, holding hands. At the bottom, in wobbly crayon, "Maybe next time, We stay forever?" He pressed the drawing to his chest and lowered his head onto the desk. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel like shelter. It felt empty. And that's when Alan finally understood. Healing, too, can hurt. The mansion returned to its former state, pristine, polished, and painfully quiet. Alan stood in the hallway, listening to the silence that used to comfort him. Now it felt oppressive. Every corner of the house still bore faint traces of their presence, but none louder than absence. In his study, the chair across from his desk sat empty, the same one Angela used to sit in while sketching designs for the greenhouse. Next to it was the teacup she always used, her lip print still faint on the rim. He reached out, gently touching the handle, as if by holding it he could feel her fingers again. A soft rustle drew his attention. Behind the bookshelf, a scrap of paper had fallen. He bent down, retrieved it, and froze. It was Lisa's drawing. 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small, holding hands in a garden. The sky was dotted with stars, a crescent moon above. Scrawled beneath in bold, uneven crayon was, "My family someday." Alan stared at the words, heart pounding. He sat down slowly, pressing the paper to his chest like it was the only thing keeping him breathing. Family. He had lost one once, his fiancée, his future. He had buried himself in work, in isolation, thinking that was safer than feeling again. But Angela and Lisa hadn't tried to replace what he'd lost. They had simply filled the space where love had once lived, and made it new. He closed his eyes and saw Lisa twirling in the hallway, her laughter echoing against the walls. Angela's quiet smile as she served tea, the way she looked at him, not with pity, but with understanding. Alan stood, the paper still clutched in his hand. He knew what he had to do. It was raining again when he arrived at the small boarding house near the church. The scent of wet pavement and distant blossoms filled the air. He knocked once, heart thudding in his chest. Angela opened the door. She was barefoot, folding old clothes into a bag. Her blonde hair was loosely tied, her eyes weary. She froze when she saw him, a shirt slipping from her fingers. Lisa looked up from the corner where she was coloring, then blinked in surprise. Alan didn't say anything at first. He simply reached into his coat and handed Angela a sealed envelope. Inside was a single handwritten sentence. "This isn't a contract. It's an invitation to come home. But this time, as my reason for staying." Angela read it once, twice. Her lips parted slightly, trembling. Her fingers tightened around the paper. She turned her head slightly to the side, eyes glassy. "You don't have to do this, Alan." He stepped closer, voice low but steady. "I know, but I'm not doing it because I have to. I'm doing it because, if it's not you and Lisa, then I don't want anyone else." He looked down at her hand, then gently covered it with his. "You didn't just stay in my house," he whispered. "You stayed in my heart." Angela let out a shaky breath. One tear slipped down her cheek. She did not brush it away. Lisa toddled over and stood between them. She reached up and took both their hands in hers. "Are we going home now?" she asked softly. Angela looked at Alan, and for the first time in a long time, she nodded, without fear. "Yes," she said. "Yes, baby. I think we are." The morning sun warmed the stone path of the garden behind the mansion. Dew still clung to the petals of lavender flowers, their soft purple bloom dancing lightly in the breeze. Lisa spun through them, barefoot and radiant in a wrinkled but beloved pink princess dress. A crooked paper crown tilted on her golden curls. "Daddy Alan, look at my crown," she shouted with pure joy, her laughter echoing through the yard. Alan, dressed in a simple gray sweater and jeans, walked toward her with arms open. "Your Majesty," he said with a small bow, "I am honored." He lifted her into the air, twirled her once, and held her close, his eyes squinting under the morning light, not from the sun, but from the kind of warmth he hadn't felt in years. Angela stood by the doorway of the garden room, watching. The sunlight caught her blonde hair, now loose around her shoulders. Her arms were crossed, but her face had softened. There was no fear in her eyes now, only peace, only breath. This was what peace looked like. Later that afternoon, the garden came to life again, this time with soft music, string lights, and the warm chatter of just a handful of people. The gardener who always gave Lisa tiny bouquets, the housekeeper who once thought the mansion would never hear laughter again, and the chef who made the cake too sweet on purpose. It was Lisa's 4th birthday. A simple table was covered with hand-painted decorations. There were no clowns, no magicians, just family, old and new, gathered under the pergola wrapped in flowers. As the final gift was handed to Lisa, Alan knelt beside her and passed over a small box wrapped in gold ribbon. She opened it slowly, then gasped. It was a delicate music box. Inside, resting in a tiny velvet bed, was her worn little heart-shaped hair clip, polished clean. When she opened the lid, the soft tune of "You Are My Sunshine" began to play, and just under the clip, engraved in silver, "For the bravest girl and the kindest mom, my family." Angela's hand covered her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. Lisa turned to her, then to Alan, then threw herself into both their arms. Alan didn't move right away. He let the moment linger, let it settle. Then he turned to Angela. There was no crowd watching, no grand gesture. Just him, her, and the girl who saved them both. He didn't reach for a ring. He didn't even kneel completely. He simply took her hand and held it. "No titles, no pressure," he said, his voice calm but certain. "Just stay, with me, every day." Angela looked at him through tears. "I've been waiting my whole life for a place that felt like home," she whispered. "I think we just found it." Lisa, nestled between them, reached up and wrapped her little arms around both. "We don't need to wish for a family anymore, Mommy," she said softly. "We already are one." The sun dipped lower in the sky as they held each other under the trellis of blooming white roses. And slowly, the camera pulled back, capturing 3 figures. No longer broken, no longer waiting. Just whole. Just home. Some stories don't need fireworks. Just a little girl, a tired mother, and a man who finally chose love over silence. If this story moved you, if it made you smile, cry, or believe in second chances again, hit that hype button and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more tales that remind us family isn't always where we begin. Sometimes it's where we choose to stay. We'll be back soon with another story to warm your heart and maybe, just maybe, heal it a little too. Until then, stay kind, stay brave, and keep hoping.